Uh-oh. He's pulling out the big guns. The old school OGs. You know 'em. I know 'em. Ladies and gentlemen, or whoever you are, let's get a hand going for motherfucking Sigmund Freud. Oh, 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 oh. Sigmund Freud, man. They said he was crazy. The guy helping everybody, trying to help them not be crazy. Why? Well, he made some mistakes. You know, the most famous one, I guess, is cocaine. Giving his patients cocaine because he thought at some point that it cured depression. Now, I'm not going into it, but if you knew nothing about cocaine, right? What is the first thing you might assume this could be used for? You know, this guy, he cared. And he stopped prescribing it. Anyway. Anyway, folks, I'm just fucking with you. You thought this was about Freud. I don't even know. I don't know about this guy. Let's be honest. But people say there was a special thing. This is what's interesting. I didn't realize this until the other day when I had a friend over and I pulled this out and I was like, "Yeah." So Richard Alpert. This is Be Here Now. It's Baba Ramdas. And then his whole thing, right? His whole thing was his relationship with his guru, whose name is always like, what was the name? What was the name? See, I always forget his guru's name. So we got from Bindu to Ojas, or, the deal. Cookbook for the Sacred Life. We got pancakes. He said, what is this guru's name? And I got Be Here Now, right? You got your, he's curing blindness, the Hanuman Foundation. Awesome, dude. But what is your guru's name? This is like dedicated to him. You got the Hanuman Foundation. Okay. This is funny here. Cost distribution. Hanuman Foundation. He's making a point. He's curing blindness. He fucking did it. What was the medicine that cured blindness? Let's not go into it. There he is again. What is his name? You see where I'm going with this? Maybe I'm overlooking it, but I'm pretty sure he's not saying it. I'm pretty sure without having to go back and reread the whole book. I'm pretty sure. Does he ever say? You see what I'm saying? This book is dedicated to. Again, I could look it up. You could look it up. His guru. What do we got here? I mean, look at all this. Okay, it's got to be coming. I'm getting tired of this point. You just see what I'm saying. This whole book, Be Here Now, right? It's dedicated to his guru. What is his name? That's all I'm saying. It's got to be in here somewhere. It's been a while since I've read this very fascinating book, of course. But again, fake out. These are, look at how skinny these essays are. This is like heavy shit, man, for such. Which is more important, also. It's like hard to say. They're reading both. But, so why did I bring up Ram Dass when I bring up Sigmund Freud? These psychologists, right? These rogue psychologists. Generational trauma, man. I'm not going to get into that. That generational trauma is a crucially important point for the human species, and not only human species, but any reproductive species, essentially, who, in particular, reproductive species where the conscious beings being reproduced become critical of the reproductive process, right? So humans were rather, to me, that's like a definitive feature. Anyway, radical depressive realism, my overall emergent, philosophical system. I said, hello, world, my philosophical system, my systematic philosophy. Anyway, it concerns really generational trauma as a fundamental problem. Let's say a fundamental problem. And it's the fundamental problem that's in the way of the fundamental moral responsibility that the human species in particular has to existing children, the needs, the well-being of existing children. Right? So antinatalism is a part of my philosophy, but it's not the point. The point is to attend to the needs of existing children. The thing that's in our way is the reproductive, the blindness, basically, of the reproductive instinct and how it informs all of society, basically. Like, another word for civilization would be reproductive society, and another word for discontents would be irrationality or contradictoriness. But what I want to focus on today is just the fact that, according to my philosophy, you have to confront, in order to deal with generational trauma, the younger generation has to confront the older generation. What do you mean? And you're like, well, there's like several generations potentially. Like, exactly. Like, it has to go in order. So the youngest existing generation is the most important. And they have, in my theory, right? Like, the world's not going to listen, of course, to my radical depressive realist theory, as far as I can tell. But if we did, hypothetically, and we changed everything accordingly, yeah, the youngest generation alive would be the most important. Their needs would be the most urgent and important, and they would have the most authority in society, right? They wouldn't have absolute authority or anything, but they would take precedent, or they would, yeah, just what they had to say would be considered first, right? Their perspective would be valued, and many like futurist kind of philosophers. I won't get into that, but like people have said this throughout history, basically, that the young, it's not just that the old are the enemy of the young. No, ageism is not where I'm going with this. But the PSA here is that generational trauma involves confrontation, right? This is as far as I can tell, that's a controversial claim. So what I've been noticing that in my own life, basically, who is dealing with generational trauma? Well, let's see, everybody, right? How many people are even aware that that's a fundamental problem? Not everybody. How many people who are aware that generational trauma is an issue in their lives that they have to deal with in order to make psychological progress, in order to heal, make progress in recovery, which isn't just a word that applies to specifically substance abuse disorders. It applies to everyone, right? It applies to the process of generational trauma, healing from generational trauma. Anyone who thinks that being born is not inherently traumatic is wrong. We can go off on a tangent there too, but yeah, this is a PSA, and the PSA is, if you take the question of generational trauma seriously, and you should, because it's fundamental, be prepared to Confront who? Well, if you're Richard Alpert, who named this person Richard Alpert? Well, this person's parents. Who named this person Ramdas? Well, this person's this guy. This person's religious authority figure, this person's guru, whose name could just go right here. Guru, your name, I love you, this book is for you, the whole thing. Where is it? Interesting. And we could, it's easy to look up. That's not the point, though. The point is, I think deep down, firstly, Ramdas never said this, what I'm saying. He said a lot of other crucial things. This book is, full of very interesting, provocative statements, but none of those statements are, hey, it's ethically unjustifiable to have children. And when people say why, you say, well, because having a child, giving birth to a child, is condemning, it consists of the condemning. It's important to stress that word, the condemnation, as if it was a legal trial, as if this child was guilty, right? And there are people with religious beliefs who are convinced that children are somehow born guilty, born with original sin. It's a nonsensical idea. But yeah, you're condemning by having birth, by choosing to have a child, you're condemning this child to, at a minimum, torture and death, despite their being completely innocent and completely defenseless. You're condemning them to this without their consent, non-defensively, meaning your only real reason for doing this is your own fear of death. And in particular, more immediately, your fear of confronting generational trauma, and specifically confronting, in many cases, your parents. About what? Well, about what they did to you. What do you mean what they did to me? I had a good childhood and blah, blah, blah. Well, again, they condemned you to, at a minimum, torture and death, despite you being completely innocent and defenseless, without consent, right? Knowing that, in fact, getting your consent was impossible. And they did this non-defensively, meaning there was no immediate threat to them such that they had to do this. Yeah, they did, and they did this without excuse, meaning it's very easy to see all of these things. So I have found in the past week and a half, especially, that I am trying to model for people. I didn't realize this because I thought I was just dealing with my own shit. Well, I am, but often when you deal with your own shit, you are modeling for other people, right? If you get free, for example, as a slave, you're pulling a Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman got free. Incredible thing to free yourself from slavery, except she more or less turned right around and tried to free other people from slavery, and not just one or two. She started with one or two. But before she had passed away, she had, been directly responsible for freeing, who knows how, in a sense, more than any one person. As far as I could tell from history, she was responsible for freeing, let's see, everybody. Everyone who was a slave, a quote-unquote slave, under the chattel slavery system, who was freed, which is something we now finally, in the last, 2 or 3 years or something, we finally collectively celebrate as Juneteenth. But this is, of course, this has been celebrated as a holiday by African Americans since they heard that, they were liberated, basically, from slavery. Anyway, the whole story there, but the point is, if you're getting free, you're also modeling how other people can get free. And you also, if you really stop and think, have an obligation to help other people get free, just like Maestro Harriet Tubman, just like Zen Master Harriet Tubman. Just like she knew. So get ready to to confront your parents, right? Like therapists are pretty. I think they're not allowed to tell you that. Like, hey, you should confront your parents about like your basic existence and how this has been an injustice, right? To ignore this. Certainly, it's been an injustice to treat you as a slave, right? A child is born and they are considered the property of their parents. They belong to their parents. And if they don't belong to their parents, they belong to some other adult. And if they don't belong to some specific other adult, they belong to the state. They're the property of the state, just like, I don't know, like a public transportation system. Just like a smart bus here in Detroit is property of the state, the government of Detroit. Such as, babies. It's a problem. Anything else I need to say? I mean, just get ready, basically, is all I'm saying. Like, if you want to heal really from generational trauma, you're going to have to deal with not just antinatalism. In fact, you don't even need to deal with antinatalism. You just go right to the part where children are, I guess the word would be creditors, and parents are, I guess the word would be debtors, right? And is that the right terminology? Basically, parents are in debt to their children, and any good parent, and certainly any great parent, those are comparative terms. And I hear that as like any good slave owner, any great slave owner, right? There is such a thing as a slave owner who's less of a slave owner, basically, than the next person. There were even slave owners in the American South during, let's say the first half of the 19th century, people who realized, hey, these human beings that supposedly, quote unquote, belong to me, they don't really belong to me. This is insane. These people are not, quote unquote, slaves. They are, let's see, my family, right? There were people who technically, quote unquote, owned slaves, except they looked at their slaves as family. They did not live in a prison shed in the back. They were not abused. They lived in the house. What house? Well, the master's house, whatever the master, like wherever the so-called slave owner lived, that's where the slaves lived. They're part of the family. They enjoy all the privileges that any white, member of the family would enjoy within the boundaries of the house anyway. And the slave master, right? Like there's still people who own slaves according to the system. They're not abusing them directly. They're trying to help. They're allowing them, say, to read when it was illegal for them to read. They're maybe even helping them learn to read. There were such people, and there are such parents. There always have been. I know such parents. My father, I think, is an example of one such parent who is an excellent person comparatively, right? But I've had to confront the hell out of him. In a loving way, but like it'll get heated, when it needs to get heated. And that's my public service announcement is like, if you're thinking, you know what, I'm not going to confront my parents ever. My question would be, okay, why are they must be dead, right? They're already dead. And a lot of people will be like, some people will be like, yes, they're dead. I mean, it's impossible. Fine, totally makes sense. Like, why you can't confront your parents? Why would you think you could? Duh, yes, I agree. However, if your answer is, well, no, they're not dead, then I have a few other questions. Like, okay, are they conscious? In other words, like, you see where I'm going with this. Like, if there's any opportunity for you to confront your parents, you have the right to do that, just like every slave ever has had the right to confront their master. Right? It doesn't mean that confrontation needs to be one of absolute antagonism and war and all that. What it means is that those slaves who revolted, let's say on a slave ship, right? They broke their chains. They formed effectively a mutiny. They took over the ship. They killed who they needed to kill in order to succeed in taking over the ship. People like the Amistad crew, the real crew, like the crew who took over, the crew that was supposedly a crew of slaves, except no, they're free human beings and they're asserting their freedom. And they killed some people, right? They killed some of their so-called masters. I'm a pacifist, and I believe in nonviolence, and I believe even if in that situation that you didn't need probably to kill as many people as there had to be some kind of revenge going on there, and I think that's not ever the correct thing to do. However, psychologically, it's often extremely understandable, right? Let's just jump to the 21st century. Hamas, are they? Uh, I've said this in other videos. I think at this point, I think, which is that is Hamas. What is going on with Hamas? Basically, it's generational trauma. It's unchecked generational trauma. It's been occurring for at least 75 years, but let's face it, it's way longer than that. But yeah, Hamas is a group of religious zealots, officially like anti-Semitic religious extremists, willing to kill themselves and others, including children. However, let me just cut to the chase here. Hamas, when they broke through, these high-tech barriers imposed by Israel and the IDF in particular, when they broke through using like old technology, using very primitive technology, which is I only laugh because it's like, wow, is that a wake-up call to the world regarding so-called advanced technology? Firstly, that there is no such thing ultimately as advanced technology, but that's a whole thing into itself. Yeah, Hamas, these folks are sociopaths, right? I mean, that's what's going on. These people are murderers. They're coming in, they're murdering everyone though, but the children, right? That's what all the evidence suggests, is that Hamas spared every child that they consciously could spare, meaning like if they were shooting at people, they intentionally did not shoot at children. Instead, they shot at people who were shooting back at them, more or less, and they mostly focused on adults who, in the Israeli system, are all, I believe, more or less all, they are required to participate in the military, which, in the case of the IDF, means participate in the genocidal project that the IDF has always been committed to against the Palestinians. They're trying to commit a genocide against Palestinians. They're getting away with it. And if you're an adult in Israel, my understanding is there's a decent chance, at least, that you have willfully participated in the genocide, not from a distance, but like you've gotten in there, you've trained, you're guilty. You're guilty. Sorry, like you're guilty of genocide. So when Hamas broke through and they started killing what seemed to be innocent victims, that's a problem, right? It's a problem to call them innocent victims, isn't it? We want them to be innocent victims because that would be morally very a very simple situation to identify, except they're not innocent, not in the system, right? And Hamas, are they a problem? Are they sociopaths? Phew, yeah. Hamas is terrible, absolutely terrible. However, this is what you get if you don't confront generational trauma over and over and over and over again. This is what you get. And if you are a so-called parent, again, a slave master, right? Like you view your children to be your slaves indefinitely, really. Like even though legally after age 18 you supposedly gain suddenly some rights, like some rights, very few. Uh, yeah, with regards to your relationship as a child still to your parents. Anyway, despite all that, parents still assert often to their, you know, to their grave, they go on asserting their ownership of their children as their property. So, like, if that's you, understand that this is what you get. Like, if you want your children to be the equivalent of Hamas when it comes time to confront you, just keep on doing what you're doing by ignoring generational trauma. Keep on keeping on. Look at all this crap we could just get distracted in. Lots of generational trauma. Lots of generational trauma. There's a whole other thing of generational trauma, right? Yeah. Fuck gurus, basically, is my point. I think Ram Dass deep down knew, despite all of his brainwashed devotion to this person who, let's face it, didn't deserve it. He was just, he had parents who weren't emotionally available to him, and the first person that came along and treated him with some kind of apparent loving respect, except guruism always fails. It's not loving respect. But yeah, like so many people, Ram Dass worshipped that person, the first person who came along and addressed for him basically the reality of his generational trauma, right? But again, that's what happens. If you want to be in a cult, if you want to fall into a cult, if you want to lose yourself in your work, your whole life, and run away from the reality of your humanity, your vulnerability, you can. You can just go right ahead. But that's again, expect the equivalent of Hamas in your life, right? Expect your workplace to become the equivalent of a Hamas training, tunnel, wherever you're working. Like, that's what you should expect. What I would, what I've learned to expect from my radical depressive realism is the opposite of that, which is before things get to Hamas level horror and madness, we're gonna peacefully deal with some shit, and maybe our voices will get raised. Maybe, like I did recently, you'll pull a stunt like running naked down the street. Like, I was literally running naked down the street. Neighbors were angry at me. We had a kind of confrontation. I practiced a kind of de-escalation, right? It was a de-escalation that involved still being confrontational at some level, right? Which is, again, not officially endorsed, but like no therapist would tell you to do practically anything that I'm doing other than meditating and taking your meds and getting a good diet and exercise. I'm doing all that, but the part where you confront your parents, the part where you help your parents heal, like you make your parents' healing a priority also, like top priority. It's directly relevant to your own healing. You don't just confront your parents, beat them up emotionally, and then leave them in the gutter. What the hell does that do for you? When Gandhi, let's let's riff on this and then I'll end. When Gandhi said, I believe he was, this is attributed to him, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Now, I haven't looked up this quote. Maybe, maybe attributing it to Gandhi is inaccurate or something. But what Gandhi was referring to was the Old Testament, an eye for an eye, the Old Testament of the Bible. So effectively Judaism, and by extension Christianity, and then by further extension Islam, the so-called Abrahamic faiths. They all have this moral assumption at their core. Even if they have updated their model, they still revere the original model, wherein, yeah, someone stabs your eye out, right? Well, the law, if they're aware of, if like there's a police officer who sees what just happened, someone stabbed this guy's eye, the police officer says, whoa, 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 okay, stabber. Other cops hold his arms. Stabber, stay right there. Stabby, who with one, Mr. One Eye. Here's a knife. You get to stab that guy's eye. Mr. Stabber is now the stabby. You're the stabber now. But you get one eye. No, not two eyes. One eye. Okay. On count of three. 1, 2, 3. Stab. All right. And the police officer's like, okay, conflict resolved. You guys figure this out on your own. We're gone. I for an I equals justice, and we're out of here. Right? Every theonomist thinks that makes total sense. Right? Because mathematically, there's no basis now for revenge because you mathematically, it was like there was one thing, you did a minus thing, you did the opposite, you inverted the sign. 1 minus 1 equals how many problems? 0. That's Old Testament thinking. And Gandhi said, yeah, except is that psychologically how it actually works? No. How it works is people just start stabbing each other's eyes, man. And when do they stop? They don't until the whole world's blind. Right? So there's a difference between an apparent mathematical, like an idea that's mathematically consistent unto itself, but has a deeply flawed assumption, a presupposition that's being neglected. What Gandhi's saying, his point is that there's a psychological assumption here that's deeply flawed. The problem is not the arithmetic. The problem is the assumption of the number one, or that the arithmetic operator negative, and so forth. Yeah. So generational trauma, healing it involves confrontation at some level. Like if your parents are dead, you're gonna have to have like your therapist pretend to be them and shit, and you're gonna have to confront the therapist. If your friends refuse to either support you in this, or when you start talking about it, they start being abusive towards you because they're unwilling to deal with their own generational trauma, guess what? You love them if you're really their friend. Like you love your friends. You don't just demand love from them. You love them in return. And you love them first without demanding anything in return. If that's the case, though, you still have to put some serious boundaries between you and your friends. Like if they're bucket crabbing you, that's unacceptable. Unless if you're trying to get out of the bucket, that's unacceptable. If you're content being in the bucket, then by all means you can allow your friends to bucket crab you all day. You're a bucket crab. Me? Am I a bucket crab? I'm gonna keep because this is so hilarious, people. I mean, come on. Am I a bucket crab? Well, are you a bucket crab? No, man. I'm a bad motherfucker. And you are too, whoever you are. You are too. If you choose to be. St. Jules of Pulp Fiction. Check him out. Signing out. Confront all authority figures. Get ready if you want to take healing seriously. Confront doesn't mean, though, eye for an eye. Confront means no stabbing, right? We're not stabbing eyes. Confront means, whoa, 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 we don't stab each other in the eye. We don't do that to people we love. And who do we love? Everybody. Who should we love? Everybody, right? Yeah. Namaste.